he opens our minds and gives us a new frame. So I just want to learn through the lesson. Meaning we're going to walk together through the text. I'll explain it as we go because it's not a long lesson. And by the time we get to the end, we'll see what he has to teach us. So, sometimes I teach out of the text, sometimes I'm much more in the text. I really feel like if we have the one class, it's good to just, dig in and walk through the lesson. So for those who, I have the text, you have the text in front of you. For those who are in front of a computer, or if you have your phone, if it's opening up the text, and for those who have an actual book, if you'd like to be able to open the book. So it's Likutey Moharan, the first volume, lesson 219. So we're just going to walk right through it, and I will explain as we go. Beetza, it's called Beetza emrato. Now, this lesson is known as he has rended his garment, which is a statement very harsh or painful statement from the Megillah of Eicha, which is read on Tisha B'Av. This year we aren't fasting on Tisha B'Av, and we aren't reading the Megillah on Tisha B'Av. We're going to be doing it on the 10th, which is itself a good, it says in the Gemara, right, it was the opinion of Rebbe Yehuda Nasi, that even though we don't follow this practically, if it's nidche, right, it should already be idchi, that if it's already been pushed off one day, it should be pushed off altogether. And so we have a little bit of a little flash of Geula in a year like this, when we are actually going to be eating on Tisha B'Av. We ate on Shiva Sabbat Tammuz on the 17th of Tammuz, and we will this year be eating, and not only eating, but eating 3 beautiful Shabbos meals, and wearing nice Shabbos clothes, and sitting at our Shabbos tables, and not sitting on the floor. And so already we have what we would call a sweetening, or a mitigation of the judgments that are inherent within the day, because we aren't actually going to be in a state of mourning on the day. In fact, you're really not allowed to be in a state of mourning on the Shabbos that is Tisha B'Av in a year like we have this year. So, Eicha, we will be reading on the 10th of Av, on Sunday, both at night, Motzi Shabbos, and also customs also by day. Beetza emrato, he has rendered his garment. Now, the rendering of the garment, an emra, is a fancy word for a cloak, and Beetza in Hebrew means to split, like liftzoa, to break bread when you make hamotzi. So that's called Betziat Pat. If you're going to open up Shulchan Aruch for the laws of the Code of Jewish Law, for the laws of how we break bread, from where do you cut, what is the practice. So all of those laws are called the laws of Betziat Pat. So it means to split something. The implication of Beetza emrato means he has rended his garment. Beetza emrato can also be read as he has abrogated his word. And sometimes it is rendered as this way, and sometimes that way, because an emra can also be read as imra, which means an act of speech, and Beetza livtzoa means to split or to break something. So, how is this interpreted in the Midrash? It says biza porfira delay. In the Midrash of Eicha, it says, what has he done? He has rended his garment. And we're going to look at this Midrash. I brought it for you down below because I want to make sure that everyone understands the chidush. Now, the new idea that's being brought here is that instead of it being read on a very simple level or a superficial level, as he broke his word, we have instead biza porfira delay, as I translated it automatically, as he rended his garment. A porphyra, actually porphyra is a Greek word, porphyra, but porphyra means a kind of beautiful royal cloak. So biza, you see Beetza, and biza is an equivalent word in both Aramaic and in Hebrew. The idea of tearing something in half. Now, if we go down, let's go down to the actual language of the Midrash so that we can see it inside. Here, this is our Midrash. B'Midrash Rabba Eicha. So that's the reference there. In the first chapter, which makes sense because it's right there in the first chapter, it says, Amar of Nachman, Amar Shmuel. So this is a statement of the Amoraim, of the sages of the Gemara. Rebbe Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, who was an early Amora, Mishum Rav Yoshua ben Levi, and he told over this teaching in the name of Rav Yoshua ben Levi. So we have like a 3-generation transmission of sages who are teaching us this teaching. Karaha Kadosh Baruch Hu lemalachei hasharet. The Holy One called out to the ministering angels on high. Amar lehem, he said to them, Melech basar v'dam, keshemet lo meit v'hu mitaber, ma darko lasot. When a human king, when he suffers a loss of someone close to him, and he's in mourning, ma darko lasot, what's his normal, what is normal action? Like, what would be the normal conduct? Amrulo, they said, meaning our angels on high responded to Kadosh Baruch Hu, to the Holy One. Tolesak al pitcho. He covers the doorway of his house with sackcloth. That means to say he puts up a public sign that he's in mourning. Amar lehem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One said to his ministering angels, Amar lehem, Afani kach ani oseh, I too do the same. Hadau dichtiv, as it says in the verse in Yeshayahu, Albi shamayim kederot v'sak asin ksutan v'chulei. So this is a quote from this point until this point, from Yeshayahu, the 50th chapter. I will dress the heavens in darkness, and I will place sackcloth to be its garment. So we see that it's a kind of reflection, that God's, so to speak, mourning over the loss of whom? I mean, what is it over? Because remember, we're on emrato. So it means HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the loss of the Beit Hamikdash is not just a loss for us. Right? One of the main implications in the lesson, and in this Midrash, is that we're always used to thinking of the loss of the Beit Hamikdash as our loss, and the Midrash is telling us, no, the king lost something, and he lost us in the land. He lost his Beit Hamikdash. He lost. And so as a sign of mourning, the heavens reflected, it means to say they go dark. And it's like a kind of universal state of mourning, affects all of the world. Melech basar v'dam, he then asked the ministering angels, if a human king, what does he do? Ma darko la'asot, what does he do in terms of to express his own personal mourning? Because we said there's the public sphere, which is called, he hangs a sackcloth on his tent at his entry, and we have the divine parallel for that. And then we have Melech Basar V'Dam Ma Darko La'asot in terms of his own personal expression of mourning. And the ministering angels, they said Mevazeh Porfira Dile Shelo. He tears, he rends his royal cloak. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, answered, Kach ani oseh, I do the same. Dichtiv, as it says in the verse, Asa Hashem Asher Zimeim Beetza emrato. That's our pasuk from Eicha. That God did as He had planned to do. That means as He had arranged. Beetza emrato. He rented his garment, because I told you that's the other way we understand that phrase. Not he abrogated his word, but he rendered the garment. And that's the Midrash that teaches us this. Rabbi Yaakov de Kfar Hanan mefarish lei. And Rabbi Yaakov of Kfar Hanan, he also provided the same interpretation. Mahu Beetza emrato. What does the verse refer to when it says he abrogated his imra? Does it mean his word? What does it mean? Mevazeh porfira shelo v'chulei. He really ruined his garment. Okay, now let's go back to the beginning of the lesson. So Rebbe Nachman assumes that we're familiar with this Midrash in Eicha and understand the idea of the term Beetza emrato having a double meaning, and that its secondary meaning is God rendered his garment. And it's not like the verse, that first verse that's a proof text there in the Midrash, about some kind of universal sign of mourning that everyone can understand, because even though the Midrash has told us he tore his garment, the Midrash doesn't tell us what his garment is and in what way he tore it. Obviously, God has no garment that he wears. There's nothing physical. The building up there is now the sackcloth. So we have here Biza Porphyra delay, an interesting Midrash, and it's a very moving Midrash, but we don't really have an idea of what exactly is meant by the rendering of the garment. So the rending of the garment. So now Rebbe Nachman is going to help us. Ki bevadai ein habeit hamikdash yachol lizbol kvodo v'gavato yitbarach. Rebbe Nachman starts off from a basic principle. He says, it is certain that the Beit Hamikdash, when it stood, is not physically capable of containing the infinity of God. And the language that he uses is very interesting. He's kind of setting us up because the point that he's going to make further on in the lesson, he really needs this language at the beginning to make his point further on. So instead of using language like I just did, I rendered this for you as the Beit HaMikdash cannot contain the infinity of God, right? That's true, and that's what he means to say, but he used different terminology for anyone who's sensitive to the language. So I'll just show you. He says the Beit HaMikdash, literally, this is what he says, is not capable of tolerating the glory and the exaltedness of God. Okay? Now, he used a few terms here. He used a term called lizbol, to tolerate or to bear. And I used a different term. I used the term to contain. Now, there's a reason why I use that term, because one of the verses that he's going to rely on in building up his ideas is one that's more, it really uses the terminology more of containment. But let's think about what he really means to tell us. The physical space of the Beit HaMikdash was physical. And we speak there about there being something called a Gilui Shechina, that there was a revelation or a manifestation of the presence of God there. Now, one of the tricky things that, it's like, it's a very interesting idea. It's hard for us to imagine, when we try and activate our holy imagination, which is very important, especially, like Shabbos Chazon, the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, we read Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amos. We read for the Haftorah the vision, and it's called Shabbos Chazon. It's called the week of Chazon, of vision. And when we talk about the vision that's necessary, like, it's not only holy vision of what we hope to see in the future, but you have to sort of be able to envision what was the greatness of the past, because the Talmud tells us that anyone who doesn't mourn over that which is lost, that which was lost, doesn't get to participate in the rejoicing over its rebuilding. And in order to mourn over what was lost, you have to have an idea of what was there. Now, when we talk about the Beit HaMikdash being a place in physical space, that somehow, in some totally paradoxical, insupportable by the laws of physics as we know them way, the ineffable, the inexpressible, the unmanifest, the infinite, was somehow manifest there. And that was the ikar. We call this like the underlying paradox of the place of the Beit HaMikdash, is somehow in physical space, the experience there was a transcendence of the limitations of physical space. So we have many different ways of speaking about it. We speak about the fact that the place is lemala min Macomb, that it's like a place that's beyond place, or we talk about the fact that multitudes of human beings, of Jews, could be contained in that space while in a state of internal self-nullification before God, not with ego. And these are things that kind of like stretch our understanding of the laws of physics altogether, meaning, or that the Aron doesn't take up space, that the Ark of the Covenant itself within the Holy of Holies didn't actually take up physical space, or the Aron bears those who bear it. We have many different ways of talking about the stretching of the physical dimensions, and not to contain anything more physical. Like if you have a glass, right? Here's a glass. It's empty. I wish it was full because I'm really thirsty, but okay, we'll wait until after. So here, this glass contains, I don't know what, probably 16 ounces or 12 ounces, let's say. So if it's a 12-ounce glass, like it can only contain 12 ounces. Once you get to the top, that's it. It doesn't have the capacity to stretch itself. Now, if you were like a science fiction fan, we could make like the magic glass. You could sell it and say, oh, this is a special glass. It's going to just keep on stretching and stretching until like as much water as you need is inside of it. And then you just, like Mary Poppins' magic tapestry bag. We all understand and know that is It's okay. That is the magical tapestry bag or the expandable glass, that these are physical impossibilities, because when you're talking about the containment of something physical, and in the realm of the physical, there's only so much it can stretch. It's got its hard limits. Now, we're not talking about something physical because we're talking about godliness. So the experience of godliness being somehow contained in physical space is itself very paradoxical. Now, we know that our whole lives are filled with this paradox of the limitations or the limited space of physical existence, that there's some other level of reality, which we call spiritual reality, that does find its way of being manifest there. Like, it's something that's it's so subtle because we don't have a Beit Hamikdash. It's not overwhelming. It's something that's very, very subtle for us. Like when you're praying and suddenly you feel like the words are containing so much more than words could possibly contain. A spiritual experience is by its nature an expansive, it expands, it stretches the boundaries of the physical words or the physical act that contains it. Like if you do any action of a mitzvah. So there is some aspect of what we call Beit Hamikdash, containment of the infinite, that's in every mitzvah and every word of Torah and every word of prayer. Now, in the Beit Hamikdash, it was something that was genuinely overwhelming, but we shouldn't think that what happened there was something that was like, that there was some physical manifestation. There was no physical manifestation except by way of signs, like the fact that the Ner Tamid, that one of the lights of the menorah was always perpetually lit and by itself, or that the fire never went out on the altar, even if it wasn't fed, and the fact that the material somehow had more space to be able to express the spiritual. But it's not like it actually is a physical container that helps to hold physical stuff, because spirituality and physicality are two very different things. Now, when Rebbe Nachman starts to use this term of, bevadai, ein Beit Hamikdash yachol lizbok kvodo v'gavato yitbarach, he means, in the absolute sense, physicality is unsuited to bear the load, if we think of it as like a kind of electrical load or energetic load. It's not capable of bearing the degree of manifestation of God's glory that was necessary in the Beit Hamikdash. Because it's not like your very small, we'll call it energetic load, that your Torah study needs to bear, or your making a blessing on a cup of water needs to bear. That is something that perhaps is manageable. But when we talk about the Beit Hamikdash and the Shekhinah, the manifest presence of the Infinite One, being manifest there within that physical space in some way that every visitor was able to experience, that is something that it's not only physically impossible, but he's also talking about it being somewhat spiritually impossible. It's too much. The load is too big. So let's see how it was possible, because we can talk about it being impossible, right? He says, bevadai ein, like it's ein habeit hamikdash yachol, it can't, and nevertheless it did. So what was necessary to make this possible? That every visitor who came to the Beit Hamikdash, Jewish and non-Jewish visitor, felt the manifest presence of the Infinite One in some way via the space, even though they didn't see anything and they didn't hear something necessarily, but it was a sense, what we call in Hebrew a hashra'ah, some sort of a manifestation that you processed within yourself, that was sensible to you but not physically tangible to you. So how is this even possible? Since according to our own understanding of the way physicality and spirituality works, it's too much. Af ki habayit, here, kimoshe katuv, as it says in Melachim. Melachim, in the book of Kings, in the first section of Kings, in the 8th chapter, that is where we find the description of King Solomon's, of Shlomo Melech's inauguration of the first Beit Hamikdash. So if we want to understand really what the nature of the Beit Hamikdash was, we look back to its original iteration. It's not really the original because the Mishkan was the original, but okay, the first Beit Hamikdash, so it's described, its inauguration is described in that 8th chapter of Kings 1. Now, if we go looking there, we're going to see that Shlomo HaMelech he offered a prayer, very long prayer. It's actually very instructive and important to learn. He offered a prayer when the Beit Hamikdash was inaugurated. And what he said, one of the things that he said, which is a very moving statement, he said to God, Hine hashamayim u'shmei hashamayim lo yichalkelucha af ki habayit hazeh. He turned to God in front of the entire assembled men, women, and children of the Jewish people, who came en masse in order to be present. And it was a Yom Kippurim, in order to be present for the opening and inauguration of the Beit Hamikdash. And he called up to the heavens and he said, Hashamayim u'shmei hashamayim lo yichalkelucha af ki habayit hazeh. The heavens, all of the universe, cannot contain you, God. How much more so not this house? Meaning, all the physical space, all the physical reality is insufficient to bear the load of the full manifestation of the presence of God. It's a place of hastara. It's necessary for God to some extent or another, to limit himself in order to be experienced here, because we're talking about trying to fit something infinite into the space of the finite. And Shlomo HaMelech, at the inauguration of the Beit HaMikdash, pointed this out in his tefillah. The whole universe is insufficient to bear this load. Af ki habayit hazeh, how much more so this house, which is of such very defined small dimensions. Rak machmat Ahavat Yisrael. It's only in the merit of his love for the Jewish people. Tzimtzem v'hilbish et gavato k'dei lahashrot shchinato b'Beit Hamikdash k'dei legalot malchuto. It's only out of God's very great love for the Jewish people that he constricted himself and he enclosed his greatness and his exaltedness in order to make his presence manifest in the Beit Hamikdash, in order to reveal his kingship. Now, this long sentence from here, Rak, until here, right? This line and a half, whatever it is, there's a big idea in there. It means that which we would consider to be philosophically untenable, which is what Rebbe Nachman has pointed out, and which Shlomo HaMelech himself alluded to thousands of years ago at the inauguration of the Beit Hamikdash. We have here a philosophical problem of how it could be possible for the infinite to become manifest in the finite. Rebbe Nachman reveals to us how such a thing could be. He says it's out of God's love for us that it becomes possible. That degree of containment, which is both, it's physically and spiritually impossible, becomes possible because of God's willingness to come down, his desire, his love for us, to come down and, so to speak, be among us in order to reveal his kingship from among us. And this is a great act of what we would call self-sacrifice to a certain extent. Even, and we're talking here about God, so it's a pretty big idea. To bear in mind how much, let's think about it in terms of a parent and a child. So when you have a little child, 2-year-old. So there's only so much you can communicate with the child. Now you want to express a lot to this child and you want to communicate with this child, but in order to do so, you must do this process also called tzimtzum and halbasha. In order to get your da'at, to get your your inner thought or your feeling over to the child, you must find some means of taking such a big, very articulated within yourself, it's such a big and complexly articulated set of feelings and thoughts, and you want to be able to give this over to it, even a 2-year-old. And so you must make it small, you have to constrict it, and you have to give it a different garment or some other way to convey it or communicate it, that's called the garment, in order for it to be effectively conveyed. And we do this, like we'll say, as educators or as parents or as grandparents, right? So we're always doing this, and we do it even sometimes without even thinking. But underlying it is that it's worth the effort for me to do something that is, takes energy from me. And I have to work on it a little bit if we're really going to break down the process, because I love the other and I want to be able to communicate with the other and be together with the other. And so I must find the way, because I don't expect that the child is going to come to me. The 2-year-old is not going to come to my da'at. I have to make my da'at, my consciousness, small enough and communicated enough to be able to reach the child. And so in our relationship with God, or we'll say in God's relationship with us, there's really not that much of a difference, meaning the model stays the same, is that he undergoes kaviachol, he allows himself And Rebbe Nachman is pointing out to us, it's called a tzimtzum. It's an act of self-limitation. Just like in order for me to be able to communicate with my 2-year-old grandson, I must learn how to make myself small, how to make myself, to make the bridge between us. And God does it for us just as we do it for others. Now, Zebachinat, Hashem Malach Geut Lavesh. Now, this is Rebbe Nachman's very novel interpretation of the verse in Tehillim. He says, normally we read this verse as meaning, Hashem Malach Geut Lavesh. God ruled, God is king, or was king. Geut Lavesh, he garbed himself in glory or in exaltedness. Rebbe Nachman says, no, don't read it that way. Hashem Malach, God wanted to have his kingship manifest because Melech in Hebrew always implies down here with the people, to be together. Limloch in Hebrew means to be intertwined with something or to consult with. It's a process not of top-down communication, but of lateral communication. And so it means he must come down in order to be Melech. Now, Melech, king, means Hashem Malach. What did he do? Geut, his natural, God's natural exaltedness, his infinity, right, his infinite nature. Lavesh, he put a garment on it. It means to say he made it small and enclosed it in some means of communication so that it has the ability to become manifest. In order, so to speak, in order to reveal his kingship, that means to say his presence, his active presence here in the world down here with us. Hilbish v'tzimtzem et geut shelo. He constricted and enclosed or engarbed his exaltedness. When we see geut, we really mean his infinite nature, his uncontainable self. In order that we should be capable of receiving and accepting the yoke of his kingship. That means to say this bond and this connection, that we should be able to receive it upon ourselves, because otherwise it would just be too much for us. Aval. Now, okay, so far so good, right? So far so good. If that's the way the Beit Hamikdash works, and that's the secret that underlies the containment of the infinite within the finite, right? Or the spiritual within the physical, so that the fuses don't blow. It depends on God's love for us and his willingness to do something which is an absolute contradiction of the nature of infinity itself. Infinity is the thing that cannot be contained, and yet, for our sakes, he contains himself, kaviyachol, which is a very big, broad philosophical concept, deep Kabbalistic concept also. Now, what happens, though, when we are not we're not doing our part of the bargain? I mean, because we have to, this so far so good, you know, like that's what happened when the Beit Hamikdash stood. But what about now? That's not where we are. So Rebbe Nachman has to address it. It says, here, we're up to this line. Aval, Kishe Yisrael chatu lefanav, when the Jewish people sinned before him, Azai kavyachol hir'ah v'gilah Hashem brach et gavato v'gono. When we sinned before him, and in the destruction of the second Beit Hamikdash, we're talking here about intolerance and inability to bear one another more than anything else. That's the root. That's the sin at the root of the destruction of the second Beit Hamikdash, and we're still in exile. The idolatries of the first Beit Hamikdash were corrected, and we only had to be out of the land for 70 years. And here we are, 2,000 years later, still in the long exile. And although there's been so much improvement and so much is better, and nevertheless, there's still a lot we're very far from, and so we're still in a very deep exile. It's especially the exile of the spirit. And so we have a question about why it's been so long, and the answer is chatu lefanav, right? And we've been distanced from our land and from our place and from our bait because we were not keeping up our end of the deal. Now, the part of our end of the deal really has to do with tolerance and love for one another. So we can see Rebbe Nachman is sort of getting at this, even though he's not saying it as such, but he expects us to be able to follow his thinking, which is that Like, why should God go out of his way to contain himself and make himself available and limit himself, kaviyachol, in such a paradoxical, impossible way, when for each other we aren't willing to do the same? And so instead of thinking of the destruction of the Beit Hamikdash as being a burning down of a building or a destruction of a building, he says, no, you should see it in a different way. The different way is that God said, I don't need to wear this garment. I'm not keeping myself so contained. And in releasing, or that's called the rendering of the garment, the rending of the garment. So in rending the garment, it's like, that's the destruction of Beit Hamikdash, is this rending, so that the infinity of God goes back to its place, kaviyachol, of being unmanifest, as opposed to manifest by the force of will and love. If that's not there, then there's nothing to hold it there. Aval k'shisrael chatu lefanav, azai kaviyachol hir'eh v'gilah Hashem nibarach et gavato v'gono. It's not that it's a punishment. It's just the natural result of no longer being in the love relationship as we had been with him. And he says, I don't have to keep on going out of my way, so to speak, to do this for you when you don't seem to be participating with me in the necessary, the necessary arrangement. Azai kaviyachol hir'eh v'gilah Hashem nibarach et gavato v'gono, v'lo ratza lalbisho l'tzamtzemo od. This infinity, the unmanifest, the exaltedness, what we call it, of God, which is the greatness of God, is no longer in a state of tzimtzum, so it kind of bursts out. Mele. This is a very big chidush, a very, very novel way of understanding the Churban. He says, Mele nechrav Beit Hamikdash. And as a matter of course, the Beit Hamikdash was destroyed. Ki lo haya yachol lesavlo k'ma. Because it could no longer bear or contain or tolerate the exploding infinity of godliness that was not any longer being kept contained by an act of will and love. It's new, right? It's a different way of looking at it. V'zeh. Now he goes back to the verse. Beetza emrato. He has rended his garment. Biza porfiradile. Shekara et halavush shelo. He tore his garment. Hainu shekara et halavush v'tzimtzum. He tore the tzimtzum, the constriction itself, the garment, the purposeful enclothing and constraining of his infinity. He tore that. That was torn up. B'chinat geut lavesh. Umemele nechrav Beit Hamikdash me'achar shekara v'bitel et hatzimtzum v'lavush shuv ein haBeit Hamikdash yachol lizbol gavato v'geono. It just, the physical space of the Beit Hamikdash was insufficient to be able to bear such an explosive, infinite load. Ki hein hashamayim v'shmei hashamayim lo yichalkelucha. When Shlomo HaMelech said the heavens, right, and all of the universe is insufficient, God, to contain you. Af ki habayit hazeh, how much more so this house. Shlomo HaMelech wasn't speaking poetry. He was talking about the truth. That really the universe doesn't contain the manifest presence of God. It only alludes to it. We only intuit it. We try and grasp for it. But in the Beit HaMikdash, something was done for us, for the world also, that was almost unbearable. And yet it was contained and contained and contained for so long out of God's love and his willingness, his desire to have his godliness and his Manhood expressed down here in the world together with us. Od shamati. So that's our first answer. Now, Od shamati bishmoli inyan hanal. Now this is Rebbe Nachman's addition, because after having quoted from this lesson, which came directly from Rebbe Nachman, so he's going to add in another idea that's relevant to this that he heard Bishmo. That means that Rebbe Nachman hadn't heard it directly from Rebbe Nachman, but from one of the other students. Od shamati bishmo l'inyan hanal shehilbish v'tzimtzem et gavato kidei legalot malchuto. This idea that God contained or enclosed his exalted, infinite nature in order to reveal his malchut. Sheizkir az ma shemar b'yom shel fanav. That he had mentioned what he said earlier. It means to say there had been a prior lesson that was relevant to this that Rebbe Nachman hadn't been present for, but he received the information secondhand. Va'inyan. What's the story there? Sheyir'ah b'chinat malchut u'b'chinat hachna'ah. When we talk about the quality of reverence or awe, which is called yir'ah, was often translated as fear, but that's not really what it means. Yir'ah means, in brief, it means I am aware that he is aware. I am aware that he is aware. Which is, how do we know this? We know this from the first segment of Shulchan Aruch with the gloss added of the Ramah, that we understand that Yir'ah is the idea of Shiviti Hashem Lenegdi Tamid, that I place God before me at all times. That means I am conscious, I am aware that he is aware of me. And so Malchut, see what he says, he's tying together a few ideas. Yir'ah, B'chinat Malchut. What does it mean, Yir'ah? I am aware that he is aware. Why is he aware? Because he's Malchut. He's here. He's present. Remember I said Malchut means presence. So he is present here. He's involved here. I am aware that he is aware. And Ze b'chinat hachna'ah, and this brings a person to a state of holy, positive submission before Hashem. And this idea of the hachna is it's like a natural corollary of this chain of ideas, because if I am aware that he is aware, because he is here present, so like it says at the beginning of Shulchan Aruch, the way a person acts when they're in the presence of a king, even of king of flesh and blood, is not going to be the same as when they're under the impression that they're alone and unobserved. And so the idea is that righteous behavior, right, is predicated on the idea that a person has this awareness of God's ever-present and ever-knowledgeable self, right, is always here. And because of that, I'm never actually alone. Now, it's not like a kind of, I don't know, chas v'shalom, some kind of unhealthy paranoia of being observed, but quite the contrary. A very, very healthy and spiritually building consciousness that the presence of God is always with me. And so I'm always in the presence of the King. I'm never out of his purview. I'm never outside his purview. Because of that, I feel a great sense of submission before God. And that's why we say such a person, even when they're not being observed, and that's what we call yirat shamayim, that's yir'ah, fear of heaven. Doesn't mean fear per se, but this very deep sense of God is here. And so therefore there's no difference between what I would do when I'm by myself, or what I would do if I was observed by somebody that I respect very highly or admire, and I want them to have a good opinion of me, because, I mean, who do I care about more of their opinion of me than my Creator himself? And that's always with me. So we can see how all of these ideas, they sort of chain into one another. And now we go over to the verse, because this is how Rebbe Nachman is trying to explicate the verse somewhat. Ma Hashem Elokecha sho'el mimach ki im liyirah. What does Hashem, your God, ask of you other than yir'ah, other than fear of him? That's a question that Moshe Rabbeinu, it's a rhetorical question that Moshe, before his passing, offered to the Jewish people in trying to delineate for the Jewish people what's the essence of divine service. And it means yirat shamayim is at the bottom of it, because it really just has to do with God's presence being real for us here in this world, and everything else is dependent upon that. So that's why it sounds like, oh, it's just one thing, but really it's the one thing that's the most important thing, because everything else that we do in divine service is really built upon that, what we call yir'ah, not ahava, but yir'ah. Yir'ah, again, not fear, not intimidation, but I am aware that he is aware. He is aware because he is present. His presence means something to me. So that's like the sort of chaining of those three ideas into a foundational principle. Hashem Yitbarach maktin et atzmo kaviyachol v'shoel mehem yir'ah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ma Hashem Elokecha shoel mimach. What is he asking from you? What is he asking of you? He's asking of you ma. He's asking of you ma. Ma in learning terminology can be translated as what. Ma also is a catchphrase, a catchword that means to make yourself as, to to submit yourself before Kadosh Baruch Hu. It means to make yourself batel, to bitul, self-nullification of the ego before Hashem. כי אם יראה, שהשם ברוך מקטין את עצמו כבכל ושואל מהם יראה, כי שואל מעמך. And he's asking of this from us. כמו שהוא מבקש מחברו. And that's also a type of divine smalling, making himself smaller. Who sho'el mi'imach. He doesn't demand it of you. He asks it of you, Moshe says. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu tells us he's asking. Rebbe Nachman says, Kemo ha'sho'el u'mevakesh mechavero, like one person asks a favor of another. Ki yirah b'chinat malchut. As we said, yirah is the aspect of malchut. Yirah is the quality of malchut, which we've already explained. Kemo she'katuv, as it says, ilmalei mora'ah shel malchut. We have several different verses and teachings of the sages, excuse me, that conflate the two concepts of yirah and malchut. And I think I already explained this, so I'm not going to go back again. Malchut b'chinat oni v'hachna'ah. We know that it's not only our hachna'ah that's demanded here, right? That's asked for. It's not demanded. It's asked for. Right? Sho'el mi'imach. It's asked for. It's requested of us. But it's also malchut itself is a kind of oni and hachna'ah. When we talk about melech in our king, in our normal lexicon, so the Shirei Das of Telz actually deals with this. It's very paradoxical because our understanding of royalty or the power of a king or something like this is kind of very top-down, very overwhelming, very detached. And in Holy Malchut, when it comes to the holiness of Malchut as a spiritual concept, it's exactly the opposite. You know, David HaMelech, King David, he's our paradigm of kingship, right? Of human kingship reflecting divine kingship, David HaMelech. It's King David. And at the beginning of the Gemara and Brachot, so we have this very profound statement where David HaMelech, it's like his daily schedule is described. From the time he would barely sleep, he would sleep less than 30 minutes in the course of the night, and then he would wake up at exactly the point of midnight, and then he would pray and he would learn until the morning, and so we have the and then what would he do with his morning? Once the morning actually started and the prayers were finished for the day, for the morning prayers at least. So then it's said of him that he would sit and adjudicate cases, and the language that David HaMelech used was, he said, I was bloody up to the elbows with the adjudication of cases of shiliot, of placentas and stains, in order to allow a woman, in order to permit, according to the halacha, for a woman who had a question about her nida status, that she should be permitted to reunite with her husband. Now, that's a very interesting statement. It's actually used to describe what the nature of Holy Malchut is. The idea of a king is not that he's sitting in some ivory tower making top-down decisions from a high place, very detached from the people, but quite the contrary. This idea of my hands were bloody, meaning literally checking garments and tissue. I mean, I have to say, like he said, placentas, he means like afterbirths, shiliot, checking to see if about the bleeding. And whether the bleeding was from a pure source or an impure source. We don't make these kinds of decisions anymore. They're quite subtle, but bein dam ledam, between blood and blood. But in any case, so the idea of David HaMelech, king of the Jewish people, with his crown on his head, sitting and paskening shailas, as we say, answering the kinds of halachic questions that you go to your local rabbi with, like a small aid, bedika aid, a small piece of cloth in which you've done an internal inspection to confirm whether your period is finished or not, and that's what you're bringing over to him. And the thought of a king doing this is such an overturning. It's such an overturning of our understanding of Malchut in the world, but it's actually a much more accurate view of what Malchut means in holy kingship, because it means here with us, dealing with our stuff that needs to be dealt with, the questions that have to be answered, the nitty-gritty, challenging parts of life. That's the job of a Jewish king, because he is reflecting divine Malchut, which is down here with us. And then that's why he says here, B'chinat oni uv'hachna'ah. Malchut is also associated with a kind of impoverishment. Ki ein melech belo am. Malchut, one of its qualities, which is discussed in the Zohar Kadosh, it says late, like he's going to bring it right now. The late migar Macomb, it has nothing of its own, and so David HaMelech is just a vessel for reflecting the light of divine Malchut. He doesn't have no ego investment whatsoever, and that's the place of the Melech. And he has to also be so self-abnegating, just like God is. When it says Ein Melech Belo Am, there is no kingship, there is no king without people. That means to say, I am not a king until you accept yourself upon me. And this is true for the Jewish king, who is not king until he is accepted and made king. He cannot be imposed. He has to be accepted. And the same thing is also true in the creation of the universe. Ein melech belo am is really speaking about something much deeper, which is that God could be all the king of the universe. Like we say, Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yitzir Nivra, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God was king and ruled before there was any other creation, and nevertheless, Ein Melech B'Lo Am, without us here to accept and be in the relationship of submitting our will to his will, he has no will to impose. And so it's something that's very, it's an overturning of the idea of kingship altogether, because our way of thinking about the king and the right of the king is so different from its origins in holiness. What we have here is a king of the universe, the king of all existence, who says, I'm king, it's true, but what does it matter if you don't accept me upon yourselves? So he waits for us to make him king. Now, what kind of a king, Miskain, is that? What kind of a king is that? That doesn't rule until you allow him to rule over you. So that's the nature. That's the nature of Malchut in this world. Is that it asks from us, not demands. Asks from us our participation. Ma Hashem Elokecha shuya mincha mimachkiim lira. What does Hashem ask of you? Not demand of you, not force you, but ask of you. Like one asks another, one peer asks another. It's a very big idea. Malchut on its own has nothing really. It's only by way of the participation of us down here in this world that it's possible for God's kingship to become revealed. There is no other way. It's only by us subjecting our will to his will that somehow this thing called Malchut gets revealed. There's no king without a people to make him king. Doesn't mean he has to have subjects to rule over. That's not really the idea. It's more like the king of the universe reaches out to me and he says, would you like me to be your king? If so, then take up the yoke. Then be willing to take up the yoke of doing my will. You must be willing to do my will, but you must choose it. I'm not forcing you. And so it is. And it gets protracted, It takes a long time to grow up. So it is perforce. The very nature of Malchut, which is one of I am aware that he is aware, necessarily comes with a kind of mutual submission, mutual act of submission, meaning I submit to his will, but he is also very much dependent, kaviyachol, on my acceptance of him. Al-Kain b'shat matan Torah. That's why, at the time of the giving of the Torah, that was our prime moment when his will was going to be revealed in the world. He wanted to reveal to the universe his expressed will and the knowledge and awareness of his presence. He, so to speak, constricted himself, lowered himself, so to speak, to meet the Jewish people. And he asked of us that we be willing to participate in revealing his Malchut. And in order to secure this, he made us all kinds of promises, covenantal promises. We say, why don't you have to promise us anything? I mean, he's the creator of the universe. Why couldn't he just tell us what to do? No. The introduction to Kabbalat Torah, to the receiving of the Torah, is we find, what does he say? You'll be a a nation of priests and a holy people unto me, and I'll be your God, and you'll be my people. So this covenantal relationship, which is one of essentially parity, not P-A-R-O-D-Y, but P-A-R-I-T-Y, parity of evenness or equality, is it is so hard for us to contain in our understanding that the creator of the universe literally comes down to me and says, please, participate with me, work with me. Right at the very beginning of our relationship with Hashem, we see it in the abrogation, at the destruction of the Beit Hamikdash, and we see it at the beginning of the relationship as a people. Work with me. Enter into this relationship with me. כל זה היה בשביל לגלות מלכותו ויראתו, כמו שכתוב, ועבור תהיו יראתו על פניכם. כי כל זה היה בשביל היראה שהיא בחינת מלכות, כשם ברוך מקטין את עצמו בשביל לגלות מלכותו. All of this coming down and making himself accessible to us and meeting us halfway, and that's in order for God's Manhood to be revealed, because otherwise it's impossible. You have to have some bridge, some levush, some garment, and some containment in order to be able to express the infinite nature of God down here in the world of the physical where we are. Let's do the last little section. Rebbe Nachman adds here, because we started late, so we've got a few minutes. גם שמעתי שמר אז דברי צחות לדרשן אחד. This is very beautiful, and it's a nice way to close. Rebbe Nachman adds, I also heard that at the time that Rebbe Nachman was giving over these lessons, he had said a kind of joke to somebody who in other contexts, he was a student who in other contexts was a magid or a darshan. He would go different places and teach Torah. Sheyashav al shulchano az. This was somebody who was an itinerant preacher who had been sitting at Rebbe Nachman's table, and at the when they were together, he sort of made a joke. He said, Beetza emrato, on the verse, Beetza emrato, which we've now understood in two different ways. He abrogated his word, he rended his garment. Beetza emrato, she'omer Torah b'shvil betza u'mamon. So Rebbe Nachman was giving a little bit of a slice to this visiting preacher when he said Beetza emrato. Beetza also means a bribe or money or a gift of money. So he said Beetza emrato, Beetza emrato. You're teaching. There are people who teach only in order to be able to earn money. So which was a criticism. Beetza emrato. Shomer Torah b'shvil betza u'mamon. Od me'in hana. That was a side point. Shamati b'shmo. I heard in his name, Rebbe Nachman says. Shamar l'pasukim yisater ish b'mistarim v'ani lo er'enu. Now this is really gets to the heart of it, and this is the right thing to finish with, right? Because that little one over there was like a way of using the verse to make a point. But here, a separate point. Here, I heard in his name, Rebbe Nachman says, I heard in Rebbe Nachman's name, that he said about the verse, Im yisater ish b'mistarim v'ani lo er'enu ne'um Hashem. Now, by the way, I'm just letting you know, that verse, can a man hide in hidden places and I won't see him? It's a rhetorical question. It's from the Navi Yirmiyahu, and it's actually brought as the proof text in that beginning section of Shulchan Aruch, where I mentioned earlier that a person's behavior when he is in the presence of a king is not going to be the same as when he's when he's under the impression that he's alone, and of course he's never alone. And the proof of that is what a person could somehow be hidden in some place where I won't see him, saith the Lord. So Rebbe Nachman is going to offer a related teaching on that verse that hooks up with what we have already said until now. When a person makes himself small, as Hashem Yitbarach gam kein maktin et atzmo. In response, when one person humbles himself, God also in response humbles himself, so to speak. Aval k'shadam mitga'eh u'mitgadil, when a person acts with great self-will and ego, he's in a state of ego. As Hashem Yitbarach gam kein mar'eh gavato v'godlo. God responds also in kind. So we have this kind of, again, the idea of the parity. V'zehu. If a person will hide himself in hidden places And Rebbe Nachman says, read that as Kshadam maktinu mastir tatzmo b'mistarim. The idea of a person hiding himself means that he's self-abnegating, and he's sort of like, he's very self-contained, and he's not a show-off, as we would say. Azai v'ani lo ar'enu. My ani, right? I, God says, I lo ar'enu. Shani gam kein mar'eh atzmi elav b'v'chinat lo. I will, instead of I will not see him, Rebbe Nachman reads this totally differently. And I will show him, or enu means show him, I will demonstrate to him lo. Lo means my aspect of also making myself as naught, making myself humble and nothing. Shani gam ken mar'eh atzmi elav b'v'chinat lo. That's how I convey myself to him. He conveys himself to me in a humble and modest way. I will also convey myself to him in the b'china, in the aspect of lo, which means humble, as nothing. Shu b'chinat ayin, be'efes, like someone who is just absolutely nothing, totally, batil mevutal, b'china anava v'shiflut v'kana. Now, to wrap it up, okay, so we actually managed, in a good time, to go through the whole lesson. So it's a nice lesson. It's not one of his more difficult lessons, but in terms of carrying it out into the realm of practicality and understanding really how it connects with Tisha B'Av, we understand the destruction of the Beit Hamikdash is rooted, as Rebbe Nachman said, in our, he doesn't say chat'u b'ma, he doesn't say what the Jewish people sinned in order to catalyze this breaking, this explosion, right? Instead of thinking of the Beit Hamikdash burning down, it's like the Beit Hamikdash exploded outward, even not physically, but spiritually exploded outward in inability to contain any longer the holiness that had been manifest in there, because God's containment of self and his humbling himself out of his love for us was broken because we had broken our covenantal relationship. The rest of the lesson, just to wrap it up, he really describes this idea that if we are not participating with him, if we are not partners, then he cannot be here with us. He cannot be manifest for us. He cannot be melech over us. Now, he finishes off by this idea he keeps on going over to the idea of maktinat atzmo. And he doesn't only mean in our relationship with Hashem, in our relationship with God, that we should be humble before God. Because the truth is, it's not that hard to be humble before God. Just like we say, it's not that hard to love God, because God is in his heavens and here I am down here, right? And he doesn't like get on my nerves, and it's only other people who get on my nerves. See, it's only other people who step on my toes. It's only other people who make me defensive. It's only other people who make me angry. And at the root of it, what we're talking about it's just a basic dynamic in living together as a Jewish people. It's that the means through which God is manifest is via the interactions that we have with other people, with other human beings, especially with other Jews. And so in being intolerant and unable to bear and submit ourselves and act self-abnegating and nullify our will sometimes before the will of others and in relation to others. So all of that self-will that we act with in our relationships with others is not just about our relationship with them, but it means that we have a basic inability to. We all understand this. We all understand this intellectually, because you can't be the person who prays with great dveikut when you're alone with God, so to speak, that you pray with great self-abnegation. Then as soon as you finish your prayer, the person who's sitting next to you, the person who's standing next to you, is like someone that you want to wring his neck because of the way that he spoke to you yesterday. We all understand from our own experience, and we know it's true, that there's something out of balance and there's something just disingenuous about being spiritually elevated or in a good place with God and somehow not managing to get it together in our relationships with other people. Something is out of place, something is not working. Now, Rebbe Nachman is kind of guiding us to understanding that the idea of being maktinat atzmeinu, meaning learning how to we'll say deflate the ego also in our relationships with other people, itself is the means through which we achieve a state of humility and humbleness before God, humbleness, humility, what does it mean? It means to be like humus. It means to be like earth, It's in the language of earth, soil. So that's something that that has to be expressed in our relationships with each other. And then, Bezrat Hashem, it will also be manifest in our relationship with God as well. And may we be blessed to experience soon the rebuilding of the Beit Hamikdash, and may He return to us with love and desire to be with us in a more manifest way, out of His love and great humility. And may we not have to fast this year.